Perhaps it would be an auspicious occasion to round up some more of the unusual suspects that some of you seem to like. Times we did this once before, of sort of going into our potpourri bag of subversive possibilities that have yet to be mentioned, thereupon commented, or otherwise made note of. Stuff that I'm sure some people have thought about that never got run into any of the ordinary channels, and great nexus of interconnected ideas, and etc., etc. So here's a few of them that just absolutely unconnected with anything, just shots fired in the dark. Number one, even some of them are things that may or may not have in some way almost made Kairos observations, may not have, may in the future, might have already done so and you forgot them, etc., etc. Number one, the shape of questions affects the contours of responses. The nude version, a little one for those of you that are taking serious neural note. The shape of questions controls the contours of the responses. Now, in the city with ordinary intelligence, there is operational experience in this area, such as pollsters have found, just ordinary people, which I think pollsters can qualify as well to be ordinary as any of us, that they have found that the way in which they couch a question, and on the West Coast, of course, the way in which they Davenport it, the question can have, as they would say, can have an effect on the responses. Such fairly simple suggestions, examples. If they go out to the public in general, and let us say it was election time, and a pollster says, if the election were held today, would you vote for A or B? If they change the way in which they present the question and did it such as, if the election were held today, would you vote for B? Or, if the election were held today, would you vote for A? They find statistical curves and corners, peaks and valleys change. Or, of course, if you're not catching the subtleness of this, they would get a different response if they went out and said, hey, you wouldn't vote for A, would you? The statistics, the responses to the questions will change. You can all follow that. That is true enough in the city. But I was going to ask if you'd consider that this has an application. And those of you who are getting real good, look at it the other way. That the reality of this is the application vis-a-vis such examples as I just gave in ordinary life. In other words, we're going to burrow back, being the intellectual dachshunds that I know we all are, into the energetic background of such ordinary examples as polling questions, the way in which they are presented, having an effect on the kinds of responses statistically. Internally, would anybody see that there is a basis as always? Why should I have to say always? Well, there's something about this kind of gesture that seems to go with always. And I know that some of you, I learned this from you, that some of you make this gesture and you've tried to say things such as Beaujolais. And then there are two or three of you did borscht, and it's just not the same as always. I don't know why. But there's some things I assume that men were not destined to know. Pardon me. That internally, think about the way in which you apparently think, known in some circles the way in which you talk to yourself, the way in which you inquire of yourself, which is the process of thought, whether you really consider or think for the moment that you engage in a kind of Socratic dialogue with yourself, You do. What else is thought? It has to bounce off of something. And you do not have to have any impression whatsoever that you talk to yourself, but you are engaged in a series of inquiries, ponderings, musings, thinking, as always. There is, I was going to suggest, a curious, overlooked aspect. Try and run with this in a parallel, simultaneous manner of the kinds of easily, which I'm going to do it verbally, the kind of easily observable examples, again, of the pollsters asking questions, would you vote for A or B if the election were held today? And as opposed to, if the election were held today, would you vote for A? And how it shifts is keep that in mind, while now simultaneously trying to keep also in your mind that there is an energetic, nonverbal reality of this in the nervous system of man, culminating, of course, in the brain, that is going on as people, I think as they are pleased to refer to it, think. I was going to bring up 2 or 3 sort of archetypical examples rather than would you vote for A or B, but the sorts of things that men apparently have thought about throughout the ages and continue to think about. And then try and show you that there is another way that it could be considered, not unlike the pollsters through their experience saying, well, if we just change the way in which something's asked, it will affect the responses from the same people. How about nice, good old questions? And it runs the gamut all over the world throughout the ages, but I'll make it easy, that men have considered, asked themselves such questions as, is God Jewish or Christian? But how about this? The question, and plug in other possibilities, but the question is never presented, that is internally, not out there. We're talking about one person thinking. To ask themselves, why is it that life is so embroiled in man's intellect the idea of a God? The question never arises. It is never presented that way. It always has to be on the basis, it has to be on a similar basis to, is God Muslim or Hindu? What might appear to be a little more personally, men continually poll themselves in this regard. Quote, why am I so mistreated? But the question is never formed in this manner. Why is it that men think they're so mistreated? See, some of you don't respond anymore because I'm afraid some of you have adopted those kinds of wild Kyrute ideas such as only sissies complain and whine. Only think they're mistreated. But who are you fooling? From the neck down, everybody still thinks they're mistreated, and probably about 27 days a month, more or less, rising above the neck level, almost to the water's getting out of the basement, up into the first floor, where the good carpet is this feeling that, yeah, I'm mistreated. So people continually poll themselves under religious guise, under no guise at all, just under personal, continual polling of just turning around, just after you have backed up in the wrong place and experienced severe tire damage, is you go, why am I so mistreated? Why do the fates continue to step on my little wanker? Why me? All that stuff. But never the question, never the poll. No one ever says, pardon me, to themselves, sir, could I ask you, or madam, why is it that you and everybody else, why is it that man believes that he is so mistreated? Simple question, makes even rhetorical sense. Have you ever asked that question? Has anybody ever asked that question? Well, not anymore, of course. Then our proverbial group of badgers with their electric typewriters typing long enough, and eventually not only all of Emily Dickinson's clothes, words would they turn out, but finally they would turn out the sentence, why do men believe they're so mistreated? So, forget that. The question is not a serious one posed to humanity. Life does not send out a pollster of any sort. Considered out there and considered in here, it's both still true. Life does not send out people being pollsters, being announcers, being prophets, being just ordinary people that stand up in the park and say, let me ask something, let me tell you something. And a group of people come around, they say, everybody thinks they're mistreated, more or less. And yeah. They're waiting for because, or they're waiting for the punchline. They say, I got a better question for you. Why is everybody thinks they're mistreated? If somebody did say that, if somebody did have this infinite number of badgers with an infinite number of time doing his speech writing, and they came up with this, and he thought, well, I'll try that. And he asked the crowd, why is it men think they're so mistreated? Do I have to even ask you rhetorically what kind of response he's going to get? Besides him being hit, the whole thing will be forgotten within 90 seconds. But whatever response he's going to get right then is going to be almost disbelief. I mean, who is going to ask to the ordinary intellect saying, why do men think they're so mistreated? It would be sort of the same thing as saying, why do men call daytime daytime? What kind of dumbass question is that? Why do men believe they're mistreated? The crowd, that is, the rest of your neural activity, old intelligence, if we were talking now about you, if it responded to that, would be, I don't normally reply to such meaningless, moot, or stupid questions as that. But the reason is, are you serious? The reason is they are mistreated. And that'd be the end of it. They would just want to forget it. Who's going to deal with somebody, an inquiry, a pollster, that's stupid? And yet the question makes sense, rhetorically. Why is it never presented in that way? Why is it that accidentally life does not let things arrange themselves? Why does not life let the words of life act almost as an infinite number of badgers or an infinite number of selectrums too? And finally just somebody say, everybody thinks you're mistreated. Wait, I got a question. Why does everybody think that? For that to happen, and for there to be an audience somewhere to go, oh my God, I never thought of that. Why is that? Because you would have a different response. It would be a different response than asking, if the election were held today, would you vote for A or B, as opposed to, if the election were held today, would you vote for A? You would get a different response. But there are certain ways in which questions can be formed that life does not allow that kind of energy to rise up and gain any audience. We could even push the stationary a little bit further. See, you don't hear cliches about push the envelope. And ask this: how come man's intellect never turns on itself and says, pardon me, are you doing anything? And of course, if the intellect would tell the truth, it'd go, who, me? Well, of course, you don't have to do that in public, because everyone publicly, your public side, everyone's very busy. I understand that. I mean, if somebody comes up and asks you, pardon, we're looking for somebody that perhaps has a little free time to think or something. Are you busy right now intellectually? Now, everybody, you're supposed to go, oh, I'm sorry, what was that? I was busy thinking about something. Ask me again. I'm sorry. But at any rate, to push the postcard a bit, why is it that the intellect never turns on itself and says, pardon me, my good man or woman, could I ask you this? And you say, certainly. Could I ask you this? Why is it the human intellect continues to pursue questions that it has long ago itself declared are unanswerable? Your intellect would probably say, I'm sorry, I don't have as much free time as I thought. But consider that. Philosophically, mystically, religiously, men continue to pursue, and not just simply in the world of academia, but men continue to have this internal polling going on regarding themselves about questions. I guess we should be a little more specific. Problems, like being mistreated in life, the injustice of life, how goodness is not repaid with goodness, regardless of what your forefathers said, and your forepriests and forerabbis, and even your foreskin. But don't worry. that the question that there are problems in life that there seems to be no solution to, also, as specifically, and you know as many examples as I can bring up, they have long ago, under certain already verbal guises, accepted, stated that they accept that the gods have already said it, that some things you can't understand. All right, you got that. And then they turn right around. I say turn right around as fast as you can within a 6,000-year period constantly. And they continue to apparently concern themselves with it. That is, under some guise, almost every civilized secondary world person would say that there is actually no accounting. No absolute accounting method is possible, no matter your degree of education, sophistication, etc. There is no accounting for the lack of specific justice in this world. All the way from the jungles of Borneo to the jungles of Manhattan. All the way from people with a grammar school education to people with PhDs, from people who are priests and rabbis to the scum of the earth, to priests and rabbis. I'm sorry, attorneys and used car salesmen. They say that there's no accounting. We will either never know, or if they're religious, they may say, maybe someday the gods will tell us. They will say that. But do you hear then every time you register a complaint, that is those people, every time you do, you are pursuing that which you have already said is unanswerable. Every time you act as a critic in any way, anytime you return the polarity of a piece of process that seems to turn negative on you, I mean, anytime somebody pulls in front of you on the freeway and you go, damn, you are replaying, there is no justice in the world, and we might as well face it. I took Philosophy 101, almost finished the damn course. And I thought about some of these things. And there is no justice in the world. I mean, you cannot equate justice. Good people get killed, good people get cheated, bad people rise to the top, they get power, they get rich, so who knows what the hell is going on. I gave it up. I don't worry about that. Damn, would you watch it? Don't pull in front of me like... They are replaying, they're pursuing that which they have already, and not just they individually. Life has driven humanity. That's what I'm telling you, that man, I was being magnanimous verbally to start with, questions that man has already wheeled his fingers around. That man has already decided cannot be answered. Then may I poll you, humanity, why, in Hector's name, do you continue to pursue them? Can you rephrase that question? I don't know how to respond to that. Is that a multiple choice or is that a trick? I don't know what to say. And of course it never comes to that because the questions are never posed in that manner. So humanity is not pushed against the wall. That is, the intelligence of humanity pushed against the wall to where they have to say, I don't understand the question. Because if I stretch justice, three-dimensional reality in such a way, and they were presented such a question, they would have to say, you got me. And that's not the way things go. That is not good for growth. That would be like turning on yourself at some earlier age, and you just received a nice shirt that you enjoyed or a pair of pants, and you turned around within 2 or 3 weeks and you were outgrowing it for several months, and you turn around and says, you're ruining your clothes. You're ruining the ability to wear these nice new clothes. And you go, uh-oh, you got me. What's your choice? Well, I'll stop growing. That is why, just one description, even I sense how many people I lost with that, but would be humanity if it was pushed in that position and say, do you realize that even though you have established it's inside the DNA of humanity that there are things that cannot be answered by the ordinary intellect? Yeah. But you realize every time that you voice any sort of criticism, any time that you are a part of that energy flow, you are still pursuing the same thing that you've always said, well, it's useless. They would say, yep, you got me, which would be tantamount to saying, uh-oh, okay, I won't grow. To say to your nice new shirt that's beginning to strain, or your pants are getting way up to your knees, and your pants complain. We sure did look nice 2 months ago, but you're growing so fast now it looks like that you're wading through a swamp with your pants rolled up. And you went, uh-oh, I'll quit growing. Well, at least it's good to be completely lost, isn't it? Rather than think, well, maybe I got lost there with that. And to wrap up this one, I could ask you to consider it this way. It would be like the ultimate question that cannot be asked, the ultimate polling that cannot be put in this form, is why is it after a lifetime, after your lifetime and after humanity's lifetime thus far, that it still cannot be seen that there is an inseparable connection between all questions and all possible responses? I'll play humanity again. That one almost makes sense, but could you rephrase it? Now I'll play the poster. Sir, madam, I think I made a mistake. You over there, could I ask you a question? That was the end of that one, because they can't go anywhere with it. How about a number 2 out of a potpourri? Or oleo. Once in passing, somebody brought this up as a rhetorical question, and it almost got no more than just the rhetoricalizing. And that is, you could use this as a inquiry, a polling of oneself. Which requires the most attention? The past, the present, or the future? How many people get anything out of that if I just left it and we went on to another one? All right, how about one little something? I'll give possible revolutionist response to my own question, number RG Green/17. The question being, which would require the most attention? Which does require the most attention? The past, the present, or the future? Possible response, it's according to who you are. God, I sure do want to leave that one with you. It's according to who you are, but I will add one more little thing, a little asterisk. If you were life, or in the parentheses, if you were a more complex person, the answer would be all three. And all three would be undifferentiated. In other words, if you could ask that of life itself, which in your experience, and of course life has got every experience you've ever had, and you could ask life, if you get outside of life and ask it, which requires the most attention, the past, the present, or the future? Life's answer would be yes. Or for those of you that got something out of a Kairoot a couple of nights ago, was the guy with a method that if you ask life which requires the most attention, the past, the present, the future, if life was using that guy's method, it would say, that won't be necessary. Which, if you can hear it, is the same thing as saying yes. The thing is, the question is inseparably, and at the level I was trying to insinuate by life, or by a more complex person, cannot differentiate. The response is what, yes, that won't be necessary, or silently would be just the world's largest, a universal hug, is that's the answer. But on a local level, on a ordinarily perceived mortal level, the question as to which requires the most attention, the past, present, and future, the answer would be it's according to who you are. Not on the basis that one of those has an answer, that, well, yes, the future, because I could stand here, and probably many of you could, and suddenly, just off the top of your head, give some sort of defense or accounting for, yes, the future, because the past you can't do anything about, and the present's kind of iffy, but the future is where we will all live. Or the better one is where our children will live. Other than those that decide to move to Akron, where there is no future. Don't write me from Ohio. Are there people? There are also people who could say, well, the present is certainly important, and I have no knock with the future, but I must point out to you that some of man's most heroic deeds, some of his greatest ideas, literature, and etc. Without question. Just follow me, my friends. Think about it. Where it's done in the past. I'm not saying that there's not some work being done now, some literature, some philosophy, some art, that may not prove eventually to warrant the description as being classical. But as of yet, we don't know. But we do know for a fact that in the past are great, heroic works of art. And so we should be giving more attention to the past. That should require the most attention of a real civilized person. You could do that, you could do it at the present. You could say, well, the future may be a great thing, and it may not be. Who the hell knows? We can't do anything about it. The past, we can't do anything about it. It's already gone. All we can do with it is right now. So it's according to who you are. But if you actually felt that there was a response that was of local significance to you, that had some pertinence, all it would show is that you're 1/3 at the best of a person. Not physically, not in the primary sense, but intellectually, insofar as understanding how the dance is going on, you're at best 1/3 of a person. That is, if you answer the question. That's why all questions are trick questions to a revolutionist. Not because I'm trying to trick you, but if you know how, every question you ask yourself, you should be going back and replaying in a way that kind of Kairut where you ask a question, and the response from the one guy, if you remember, was, hey, is this a trick question? All questions are a trick question if you know how to do it to yourself. Because as soon as you give yourself any choice, as soon as you say, would you vote for A or B? Do you want cream in your coffee or not? That won't be necessary. You people laughed at that a few nights ago, and I suggest nobody actually knew why, which doesn't mean that you didn't get anything out of it. Because that is no response. Ha. You could say, well, it's some kind of provoked, some kind of crude laughter because it's just a non sequitur that somebody says, are you going to the dance tonight or not? Are you going to Mass in the morning? Yes or no? And the response is, that won't be necessary. Ordinary intelligence could say, well, I laughed at that once, maybe twice, because it's just a non sequitur. It's just dumb. Tut tut. Think about it. It's more than dumb. I don't really want to go into it because some of you should be able to see the response is not just to be stupid or to say something nonsensical and something is non-sequential or non-logical. It is saying something. Someone is asking you a question. Someone, life, your own self, your own intellect, is pointing out that there are two choices here. There could be three choices, but normally, as you know, it's two choices because everybody's brain has got to operate at maximum, or should, efficiency. And in the 3D world, it operates at maximum efficiency by being given two choices. Now, if they're going to be more eventually, do it the way that God's intended if you live in the city. That even though it may be Bastard and Robbins with 32 flavors, you start off and you say, would you like a big cone or a small cone? A big one. Would you like sugar or ordinary cone? Sugar. All right. Do you want the low-fat yogurt ice cream or the regular ice cream? The regular. All right. Now we get to the flavors. Do you want one out of list A or list B? List A. So you should keep narrowing it down. That's the way the intellect operates efficiently, the most efficiently. Think about the guy's response. There's still, I'm not going to carve it down close enough to the bone to make it that crude, but some of you should hear this. I think you do. You're given a choice. Is God a Jew or a Christian? Do you want chocolate or vanilla? Do you want a large or a small? Are you going tomorrow or not? And the guy's response was, that won't be necessary. Oh, I'm tempted to cut a little more, but ordinary people might say, well, wait a minute. That won't be necessary. So anytime I was going to say the trick question, even to yourself, and it does not have to be in the form of a question, it's in the form of ordinary thought. Anytime that you are given a choice, whether it appears to come out here or whether it seems to arise from your own intellectual stalwartness, and it arises in their choices, such as which should demand, and we can throw in other adjectives and clauses and make it even sound more fancy-ancy, to a perceptive man and woman of the modern day, an insightful person, may I add, to such a person should more of their attention be given to the past, the present, or the future. And if you're the self that's being asked this question, And you go, believe me, it won't be necessary. Your answer is of no consequence. I know the answer. The answer, and you should know, no matter what you say, the answer is, yes, I'll volunteer to clean out the toilets. Did somebody call for dumb? I hate to be crude. Ordinary. Reasonable. Yes, I'm here. Yes. That's all you're doing. You're volunteering the information. The pollsters are asking, okay, do you want chocolate, vanilla, or the past? Would you vote for A, sugar cones, or the future? If you immediately go, you're done for. You have answered. It doesn't matter what the answer is. Don't you understand that by now? In the city it does. People apparently, observably, fight wars. They kill each other over that sort of thing. Which, again, as all of you know by now, as all of you suspect. That's just the superficial kindergarten clothing, which a real revolutionist should outgrow. The energy behind it is such that it does make it appear at historical, observable levels that people will kill each other over, God damn it, woman, I told you I wanted a sugar cone. Every time I don't know what's going on with the world. You go in a place and you ask for something, I say I want a sugar cone and I want Rocky Road. And suddenly a guy pulls out a gun and shoots some poor girl behind the ice cream counter. It wasn't that, but that is the appearance. The headlines will say, teenage girl, part-time school worker at ice cream parlor, shot over cone misunderstanding. Now let's leave the bloody world of dairy products and consider in here. If you respond, now consider you're on both sides of the counter. You're the madman with a hunger for a sugar cone and a .38 stuck in his pants. Now, I mean a gun, not anything else. If it's .38, I don't guess you can get in your pants. That you're playing that side, and you're playing the poor girl on the other side of the counter. Anytime that you are the little girl and you inquire, would you vote for A, B, or C? Would it be the past, present, or future? Is God a Christian, a Muslim, or a Kiwanan? If you will ask that question on one side of the counter, that is on one side of your own neural network, if you'll ask that on side of one, either it could be singular or a series of synapses, and you ask it over there, and on the other side of the counter, you even show any signs of responding. That is, that you are going to respond. That is, that you are in that energy flow, and you don't take it as being unusual. You don't see it as being the same old stuff over and over. You do not see that it is a slow death through lack of variety up here, that there is no stimulation. That the inquiry comes even internally from you. All right, do you think that ice cream is Christian, Jewish, or Hindu? Would you vote for A, C, or B flat? Whatever it is, if you're in that thing, if you're in that flow, you're going to do the kind of little things I was pantomiming and doing. As long as you go, well, there is nothing after well. Now, at the city level, apparently there is. That you say, well, I'd vote for B. And they might say, oh, in that case you win a new Corvette because you're the 10,000th person that said B. So it apparently has some consequence. But insofar as this, once you're given the inquiry, the question, and if you go, it doesn't matter after that. Is the answer. That is, if you have an answer for the question, that is the answer. The answer is, never mind. You're still in the boat. You're still in the city. It's life still like, well, I just wanted a quick head count here of, how many people still dumb and stupid? And, you helped out right immediately because you volunteered. Yes, me. Yes. Who considers that humanity may not be as intelligent as it could be? Life can ask it that way. You don't know how easily it is for you to be tricked. And if you say, do you think it's possible that humanity might be being tricked? Yes or no? I think yes. That's all life needs to know. You're still, you hear, I'm trying to make the question sound, if it's not succeeding, more sophisticated, more hip, more all-encompassing, rather than just, do you want chocolate or vanilla? If life said, do you think it's possible that humans react too easily to a limited variety of choices. Yes or no? When you go, well, I've thought that before. That's the same thing. Life, it's like it is turned around with billions of little sheep, and it just runs out on the side of the mountain and wants a quick count. Like, how many sheep are still going to go along with the herd and not give me any trouble? I don't want sheep out here that are carrying around 38s and they're slinging little waistbands and give me a... How many of you are still in line? How many of you are still in the slaughter queue and you don't know any better? And that's all it wants to know. And all it's got to do is ask any question that offers a choice. Whatever it is, if it asks all the sheep, do you find wool to be a scratchy wearing apparel? Yes or no? Do you think there's some mystical significance in you being sheep? It doesn't matter what it is. If the sheep go, that is most of them, they go, well, that's all I need to know. Now, I give it this, life is not crude enough to stop and point out and holler, you dumb suckers, you fell for it again. You know, all life does is ask that sort of question. And it doesn't have to do it once a year. It's sheep dip time. It's like it did it one time and humanity is still reverberating around it. That is, that you continue to replay yourself. Was man free-willed or not? Is God a Jew, or could he be a moose? Or a mason? As long as there's any question that seems to have any pertinence and people go, I don't think that question has ever been properly addressed. Now, perhaps Aristotle may have been on the right track, but maybe he had a health problem. I think perhaps I should pursue this further. I believe I might be able to put a slightly different lambda on it. You're doing the same thing. It's like hollering, who's still dumb? Never go, me, bah, bah. That's all it needs. But notice life, as I started to say, doesn't stop and go, ha, ha, ha. It asked the question like one time, a long, long time ago, and just wandered off. And everybody thinks, well, I'm still responding. And as far as you can tell, life's still going, yes, I'm still writing all this down. And it's like you come along 6,000 years later and say, wait a minute, that question having to do with free will or where we go when we die, the Egyptians. Some of what I've heard was pretty good, and by you doing this, the way in which you're plugged into the nervous system of life, it's as though you, as you're correctly supposed to, believe that life is still listening, that it asks this question, whatever it was. Do you want chocolate or vanilla? Do you believe in free will or not? Do you think, from the sound of my voice, do you think I'm Jewish? Do I sound Jewish? Yes or no? And it's like he asked this 6,000 years ago, and people are still going, well, wait, let me respond to that. And it's the impression as though that he's still there. This great anthropomorphic God is still there taking down notes. He's still polling, and, well, let me hear your opinion. And you don't need that. He asked it one time. Whatever the question was. Do you want chocolate or vanilla? Do you believe in me or not? Do you think there's life after death? Do you think there's life after a charge card? Whatever it asked, and then he just wandered off. He didn't have to say, as soon as everybody at that time went, wait, I got an opinion. And he went, well, in that case, I know what. He didn't need the answer. As long as you go, yes, I'll respond to that. That's all he wanted to know. But notice he didn't point that out. It's like he left it open-ended so that everybody thinks they're still responding. Like he's still interested in the question, and you're going to come along because, no offense to Plato or Aristotle or St. Augustine the Hippo. It's no offense that they didn't know any better, but perhaps you might add something to it. In all due humility, it's different times, different places. You have a better diet than the Greeks did, perhaps. And so perhaps, just perhaps you could add a little something. And the feeling is that he's still around going, well, yes. The case is not closed yet. I'm still taking input. The truth is, of course, now I forget all ideas of anthropomorphic old men painted on black velvet, is in your own nervous system. Anything that you seem to inquire about, and it doesn't have to be in the form of a question, anything that you feel as though there is some possibilities that things should be otherwise. Like if I had lived in London, for instance, right after the war in the 40s and 50s, you're seeing this while on the expressway and you've almost had several of your fenders taken off your brand new car, and it strikes you that you were over there after the big war. If I was in London, if I was living there, as things were 20 years ago, and perhaps even a little bit now, this sort of thing wouldn't go on. People are more civilized, people care about one another. It's just, all you're doing is saying, yes, I'll vote. And the question's always the same. Now, you think that's a different question, that You mean, wait, now the question is that you're inferring, I'm speaking now for ordinary intelligence, but he's saying to me, wait, now you're inferring, you've changed the question. Now it's like people are saying, are certain groups of people more civilized than others? Are the British more civil to one another and courteous than Americans? See, all you're doing is going, bah, bah. It's the same question. Do you want chocolate or vanilla? Don't be silly. That is not the same thing as saying, can't some people or couldn't people be more courteous to one another on the highways? Do you want chocolate or vanilla? Is God right-handed or left-handed? It's the same question. As long as you go, well, bah, bah. That's all he wanted to know. Of course, it's not he wanting to know. It just keeps the polarized nature of life. It keeps the energy flowing. But to yourself, anytime that there seems to be, where I was going to in this paragraph, believe it or not, it seems to be, anytime your mind, just your ordinary intelligence, considers questions that have possibilities, alternatives, like, now put all this in quotations. I'm playing up my little part again. People going, I hate to be an old sorehead in life. I hate to show my age, but I'll be damned if people were not more courteous and responsive to one another's needs 20 years ago when I was young. Bah, bah. That's all you're saying. And I don't care how firmly rooted it seems to be based upon instant experience. You could have just been being mugged. I don't wish that on you. It's not fun. It's not fun to get hurt. It's not fun to be sick. It's not fun to be robbed. It's not fun, any of that. But remember who whines and complains at any rate. And if in any way you respond at the old ordinary level, that is, it could be otherwise, you're saying that the polarization of this situation, that's what you're saying about knowing it, could be otherwise. And even I hate to be as dumb as to talk in wolf talk around sheep, but the closest thing that you could put in a verbalization is always this, which comes out saying like, woo, or arf, arf, because the only possible verbal improvement on that is, wait a minute, things could be otherwise. We don't have to live like this. Would be like a wolf coming up and saying, I hate to do this. I wish I could do it in wolf talk so I wouldn't have to actually put it in English, and then you'd have to figure it out. All right, this is a crude translation, but because it wouldn't even be said, but if it was, it would be to that kind of response that, wait a minute, things could be otherwise. Would be this non-human response would be, if things could be otherwise, that's how they'd be. Everybody knows that. But if you said that to a bunch of sheep, they'd probably all just suddenly raise their leg and do something of a very crude and primary nature, because that does nothing to the polarized nature of three-dimensional intelligence to say, well, if things could be otherwise, they would. You know, ordinary intelligence would be like, hey, where'd you get your PhD in philosophy? At 7-Eleven? At Kmart? I mean, what kind of phony baloney junk is that? If things could be otherwise, they would. And they're correct. That has almost no validity. That kind of verbal currency is almost valueless to say that. Because what can polarized thinking do with that? That if somebody says, well, wait, all you're talking about, the example you're using is somebody saying, wait a minute, life could be otherwise, or this situation. There is no reason that people must mug one another, each other like this and beat up old people for their checks. And they go in because all we got to do is improve the climate here, all we got to do is improve the financial situation. They saw that, and then if we could play with justice, that somebody could say this and have any understanding and had an audience, and somebody said, wait a minute, you're wasting your time. As disagreeable as that situation may be, which I'm not saying it's not, but as disagreeable as that seems to be, if it could be otherwise, it would be otherwise. In ordinary intelligence, what can it do with that? You have taken the ordinary polarization of three-dimensional thinking and you have turned it around in the other direction. And there's nothing you can do with it, because ordinary intelligence, once you have reversed what appears to be some flow of energy verbally, and so, well, it appears to be this way, right? And the person goes, yes. You say, well, if it was otherwise, it'd be otherwise. And all it can do with that is then picture, well, it could be otherwise, and it can picture. And it could say, well, that's this very sort of thing that I'm trying to critique, that I'm saying it should be otherwise. And this voice, again, from Neverland, behind a wolf rock, somebody, a voice with a wolf ticket in his pocket, tried to say, well, wait a minute. I understand that you have a complaint with this situation, and I'm not saying it's not justified, but if you're going to try and think further to say that it could be otherwise, think about this. If it could be otherwise, by your own words, it would be otherwise. The only way in which ordinary intelligence can run with that kind of polarized information is to say, well, all right, it could be otherwise. And if you say, all right, if it could, it would, then you can think, all right, if it would, it could. No. You might as well be taking a polarized stick. You might as well be taking an ordinary magnet and you turn it around and around, which is the nature of what normally passes for philosophy in life. Then it's just a matter of how you seem to couch the question, the shape of the question, the shape of what seems to be the problem which you're considering is going to affect, if not control, the absolute contours of the apparent responses. Before I go past them again, I kept promising. We had a couple of good questions I've been carrying around that came in from folks. And I'll paraphrase a little of it. But one of the questions, the basis of it is this. That in relationship to what we've been calling the primary and the secondary worlds, would not TKS, this kind of stuff, be like a third new level? Do I have to respond to that? Would it even be profitable? Okay. Since as far as human memory goes, which is as far as the intellect has been fired and primed, you have had the primary and the secondary level in various degrees of relative importance, in various degrees of the percentage. If we were talking about one person, if we were talking about large groups of people, if we were talking about the institutions, if we were talking about the normal flow of thought, the relative weight of the primary and the secondary changes. But as long as you've had that kind of division, even not using our description of it, but they had some description as far back as you find humans talking and recording. You found that kind of description. They've just called it all sorts of crude, almost inoperable, their descriptions, divisions of it. But you have found that, and at the same time the response to the question is not this sort of thing, this kind of stuff, a third possibility. It has always been so. But it's always been so now on the basis that it comes out. It's easy enough for me to call it TKS or just call it this kind of stuff and not insist it has no particular name. It always has a name. I mean, if what we're doing here, if that had any sort of more popular support and all of us dropped dead, let's assume that somebody would pick up from the tapes or somewhere, well, hey, the name of that stuff was that kind of stuff. And so it would have a name. Or if I said it got no name, then it'd become, hey, it's that thing that got no name. But here's the point. The way it comes out with ordinary intelligence, with three-dimensional thought, the history of it always has it as a third possibility. Again, it's not necessarily called that, but it's has always been, if you were, just take as a quick archetypical example, we're talking about the Sumerians or the Greeks, was, wait a minute, there seems to be one kind of thought, the way in which people live, and then there's the kind of ideal way in which people should live. Or there seems to be the carnal, basic way in which people just grub for a living, the crude, the masses, the hoi polloi, and then there are us who try to be more civilized, us who attempt to aspire to some real intellectual life. They do all that, but then there's always, as far as you can find the history of man, genetically in you, you don't have to check all history books, but in you, there's always been a spot, an offshoot of, not literally an offshoot, but an area inside of the DNA that raises the small interest continually of another possibility other than chocolate and vanilla, other than a spiritual life or a non-spiritual life, other than being a Christian or being a Jew, other than being right or being wrong, other than being civil or uncivil. There's always been this small part that was talking about a third possibility. Except at the time, it has no known widespread currency between the first two groups. And so it really has no name at the time. It has a name after the time if, for whatever reason, life decides to remember it through man. It is always there. It's not always the same, but it's always there. How could it be otherwise? And if it was going to have a name, if it was going to have any stability during the lifetime of it, do you understand then the thing, whatever it was, this kind of stuff, at that time would have answered the pollster? It would have committed suicide. Jump right quick from ordinary people, external people. If we were talking about the kind of areas of, let's just call them factors or forces going on, and you've got chocolate and vanilla. You've got the polarized nature of reality in a three-dimensional world. And then let's assume that there is a third possibility, or there seems to be. And some of the first two, in some way, tried to ask, or tried to speculate, or tried in some way to express a feeling that there is another possibility going on. And it's almost as though then life itself inquired of man, are some of you thinking that there's a third possibility? Is there a third possibility there in the genetics of life as I've done it right now? And if this third possibility went, you understand my pantomime again? If it's already prepared to respond, it's done for. That is the response. It doesn't matter what it says, but if the third response, if the third possibility did respond to the inquiry like, is something going on even in, I'm speaking for life now, the body of life itself, if its own intelligence went, is there something going on in me? Is there something going on even I'm not fully thinking about? And then this part of life's own intelligence went, well, that is the answer. Then that possibility, that, the way that I assume you're following, I was putting it theoretically in regard to the question, that would be theoretically responding in the way that this might be something extraordinary. The possibility might be. If it indeed responded to the general inquiry, let us say from the almost non-specific, universal aspect of waving your arm like it was life itself, and said, is there something going on, an extraordinary, an unusual, a third possibility in me? And the possibility went. You understand? The possibility is about to, it's considering responding. It's already responded. The third possibility, no matter how extraordinary it might have theoretically been, this new possibility went, meh. That's all it did. And that does happen in life. And when it does, it's as though, again, that life would go, oh, well, like I don't have to worry about that. It's like it was like it surveying the great flock, and maybe it thought for a while, that, do I see some kind of atomic sheep in there? Or do I see one particular ram somewhere that seems to be dressed up like soupy sails or super lamb? And it's like it says, is something unusual going on down there? And if whatever sheep he was looking at, using that, you understand, symbolically, and he looked down the herd and said, there's something going on in that. If that something was a potentially extraordinary sheep, just assume it was. As soon as it went, whatever it went, but as soon as it went anything, as soon as it responded to the inquiry, all it's done is go, and it would be then as though life would go, oh, one less thing to worry about. For those of you that think Bacharach made up that philosophy, well, that's one less bell to answer. But it's one less sheep to worry about, one less possibility of something extraordinary occurring. Since we have run out of time, I was going to just suggest, even though I started out saying that all of this was unrelated, that you consider, I assume that should be a little more clear, that the idea I was using initially of the pollster and the inquiry is not at all removed. It is not at all differentiated from the processes that pass for thought in the three-dimensional world. That everything you think about is, in a sense, a series of inquiries. And if you respond to them on the basis in which they are couched, then to say that the shape of the question controls the contours of the responses is an understatement. It is that it is a foregone conclusion once you get past that kind of polarized possibilities of it either being chocolate or vanilla, even though the possibilities of chocolate or vanilla may go on again for 16 other choices through Bastard and Robbins numbers. And don't ice cream lovers write me. Just a joke. That as long as you go through that kind of sequential, polarized possibilities, if you're going to respond to them, the response no longer matters. The response is absolutely controlled by the question, and it doesn't matter what the question was. As long as the question poses apparent possible alternatives, and they're all polarized, which there's no way out, as long as you respond, as long as you even consider responding, or if you refuse to respond, unless you got good enough with the guy who says that won't be necessary. As long as you respond, as long as you energetically react to the posing of the question, the response doesn't matter. I was trying to get you to wrap it up, is to see that it has nothing to do specifically. It's certainly not limited to what would appear to be questions going on in you, but it's the thought process itself, that I am going to narrow down all 32 flavors, all 32 possibilities of the truth, or all 32 possible explanations of why I am mistreated until I get to the basis of it. That's the basis of it. The basis is, as though life is asking, is everybody here still sufficiently dumb? Now just answer me. Or as they did in the service, they learned. Those of you that don't believe in God, trust me, they learned. First day they ask you, do we have any college graduates here? And the sergeant says, well, we need the toilets cleaned out. You men hit it. That's the kind of lesson that life knows men are never going to learn. Because as long as you consider responding, hit the toilets. Take a toothbrush and clean them out. Glad we got some college graduates. Or it's as though life saying, glad we got plenty of sheep. Frightened me for a minute, I didn't know we get the toilets clean. And 15 billion men go, on that cheerful note, I guess if I can start off, we'll all line up and we'll get our yearly dip right over here, and then we can all go back up in the mountains. All go back up in the mountains and be tick-free.